Hello and welcome to Property Matters. I'm Stephen Galpin, and today we're going to be looking at the effects of the spring statement, and joining me to discuss this is John Howard, developer, author, investor, educator, entrepreneur, and a jolly good chap too.
That's very kind of you to say so. It's great to be back with you today.
Good. Nice to see you, John.
Thank you.
John, before we start, I was just doing my sort of research for the programme, and I came across a quote from somebody. As you know, we've just had MIPIM, which coincided with the spring statement almost. Yeah. And for those that don't know, MIPIM is a sort of collective gathering of people in the south of France in the property market who generally have a good time, but on the odd occasion do discuss property matters. And
the odd deal is mentioned.
The odd deal. Okay, and I'd just like to read the quote because it maybe just give us a bit of a clue to the background of what this spring statement is going to do for the property market. And it goes like this. While agents report rising house prices, the increases are uneven, driven by gains in the north of England and Scotland. Mortgage rates are still relatively high and the market is sluggish. Smaller residential developers are seeing a 10 to 15% drop in pricing, and many developers are now adjusting their financial models to account for longer sales cycles and reduced profits. Mezzanine finance is increasingly being used to bridge funding gaps as mainstream lenders tighten their criteria. What do you think of that?
Well, the good news is Scotland, because I've got two developments I'm doing up there. Right. So I'm delighted that the market's increasing in Scotland, which is, you know, if you think the local authorities are difficult in England to deal with, work in Scotland. In fact, some of the major house builders have pulled out of Scotland because of that, which says everything about a sort of socialist government, really, doesn't it, up in Scotland? But there we go. I think I don't disagree with the statement you've made. I do think that the problem at the moment is because we are only just having the increase in stamp duty. There's been a bit of a false market for the last 3 months where people are rushing, especially in London, first-time buyers particularly, are rushing to get completed by the 1st of April, and we've just had that, obviously. So I think the next 3 months will be very, very telling, and I think it's going to be a lot tougher than people realise, because I think it's been masked slightly, London especially, but elsewhere less so, by the stamp duty increases starting on the 1st of April. So I do think that things are getting tough. Interestingly though, most of the house builders in the UK are saying they're going to build more houses this year than last year, and that their sales have held up pretty well. And even in the last month, where you couldn't get the deal through quick enough and all the rest of it for stamp duty savings, it is showing some improvement. However, it's the spring, the sun's out, we've got daffodils in the garden and everything else. So this is the traditional time that people put their more expensive houses on the market.
Sure. John, let's just go back to the beginning here. This spring statement, was it a budget?
Yes.
You really think it was?
I think they're in all sorts of trouble. All sorts of trouble.
I mean, I've thought for a long time, well, I'm certainly not alone, that this business of a target of 1.5 million homes is just so unrealistic. It's untrue.
The last thing I heard, it was an aim, not a target. It was an aim. And what they'll try and do is, in the last year of the Parliament, they'll try and get to the right number going forward every year, if you get my meaning. So that's what they'll try and do, and say, oh look, we're now reaching that target on an annual basis.
But we'll come to some of the difficulties over that figure shortly and look at it in a bit more detail. Yeah. But let me just ask a general question here. Government are pinning a lot of hope on the reform of the planning sort of process, if you like, to help get to this figure. Are you experiencing any ease of process or anything that's particularly helpful in that?
Well, I like to think it can't get any worse, Stephen. We've had a planning application in, which I've been consulting on it. I don't own it, fortunately, but I've been consulting on it. And it's taken us 3 years to get planning for 133 flats in a 12-storey building in Birmingham. 3 years. Now, there was complications. I'm not saying there weren't. But that is just total madness. If you ask any house builder, the biggest problem they've got is that the length of time it takes to obtain planning permission. It can be anything between 9 months to 3 years on a reasonable size scheme. And of course, the trick they do is they threaten you. If you don't withdraw the application or give them an extension of time, they're going to refuse the application. That's how they get around it. Mm-hmm. And that's disgraceful.
Well, I suppose what they're saying is effectively, if you force the issue of time, then we'll have to make a negative statement on it.
Yeah. So whatever Ms. Rayner says, you've got to try and get the local authorities and the people working in those local authorities. And of course, if they're a Conservative council and you've got local elections and everything else, I used to think, and other people I know think, that the local elections aren't very important. But actually they're very important, because if the council changes from a Labour council, control council, to say Conservatives, are the Conservatives really going to help Labour help their housing policy push it through in areas where they have a lot of voters who vote in the local elections and don't want extensions to their village and to their towns? This is the problem. It's political.
Are local councils so political? Yes. You think they are? Very, very political.
And they will do anything they can. So, if things aren't going well, and with any government midterm, they always lose a lot of council seats and all the rest of it. And this lot won't be any different. And what you'll find is they'll lose control. And once you've lost control, you've lost the steering wheel. And once you lose the steering wheel, you've got a problem, because it could go anywhere.
Yes. A bit like certain self-drive cars, I suppose.
Well, there you go. You wouldn't want to risk those either, would you?
Not really. But there we are. John, again, we've heard a lot about increased numbers of planning officers.
Yes, that's a good idea.
Well, it is, but I think I read that it actually equates to about 1 per district, or 1 per local authority. Is that really going to make much difference?
It's a complete joke. So I responded to an article. I had an article published, I think it was in the Daily Telegraph quite recently, and I was asked these questions. What can they do to increase housing and this, that, and the other? And I said, double the amount of planning officers and pay them 50% more than what they get paid now. Because the problem is the good ones. And there are good ones. There are good, decent people that work in the planning system, without question. Very bright, articulate people, but they get offered a lot more money in the private sector if they're any good, and they go. So, 1 minute you're dealing with. I've had applications where we've been dealing with 3 or 4 different people over that period of time because they've all left. It's just bonkers. And unless you can retain staff, look after them, pay them better. And what they are suggesting, which I don't think is a bad idea, is that the councils will be allowed to charge. They're meant to be doubling the fees, the planning fees, by the way, from the 1st of April. They're being doubled. The fees are being doubled, the planning fees. So how that helps people, build more houses, I don't know when you double everything, but there we go. But they are going to let the council, the local authorities, planning departments, charge whatever they want for the planning fees, apparently, going forward. So that was quite interesting, and they want to allow them to keep that money in order to ring fence that money to run the department, which I think is a pretty good idea, because they must be making loads of money, some of these councils, on planning fees.
John, let me ask you, are the planning fees consistent across the country?
They were, but they're not going to be.
Okay, so I don't know, I dropped this question on you, I don't know, it's a bit unfair, but just...
Probably, Stephen, you normally are.
Well, let's just ask, so if you're building a development of, let's say, 30 units, and this guy here is building a development with, say, 200 units, what would be the difference in sort of planning fee? What would a typical planning fee be for the smaller one?
Well, the smaller one I think is about £500-600 per unit, something like that.
Right.
So
Okay.
I mean, it mounts up. You can imagine.
And on the larger, so it's per unit, is it?
Per unit, yeah. So we've got an application that we're trying to get in by the 1st of April. It would have been £16,000 to put in. It's now going to be 32,000 if we don't get it in on the 1st. Can you imagine the amount of people rushing to get their applications on the 1st? That would cause a massive backlog. So, and that's for 22 units. Yeah. So yeah. So a bit more than that actually, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's quite prohibitive, isn't it? Especially for the
That's
smaller sort of entrepreneurial developer.
Which we all are. I mean, anybody that builds or converts property at less than 250 a year is considered a small developer. So most of us are considered, even if we think we're relatively successful, we're still small compared to, Persimmon Homes will build probably 9,000 to 10,000 houses this year. Although Barratt and all those others, similar numbers, a bit less. But they still build 62% of the new homes in the UK every year. And they've got complete control of the market when you think about it.
Just going back to developers, I know 2 or 3 years ago and prior to that too, there was a lot of criticism of developers from the then government, sort of saying these companies were banking land. They weren't developing, they were just buying the land, putting it in the cupboard for later on. Yes. The government would say so that land prices increase and they bring it back in 5 years' time and it's worth double the money. But you see, that's not really the case, is it?
I don't think it is the case. No, I think they are commercial companies, and of course, if in an area build costs go up dramatically and it's not worth them building on that land for the time being because they paid too much for it or whatever, they will hold it back. It's just like if the market, 2 or 3 years ago, the market looked like it was going to really slump, and these big house builders just close down sites straight away.
But John,
they don't carry on building when they can't sell. They need an order book. They work on their order book.
John, just on basic economics, if I had a sweet shop and a rep came in and said, well, look, you always buy one of these tubs of sweets every month, but I've got an offer here and there's 6 tubs of sweets you can have for a third of the price. Yeah. Well, I'd buy them, wouldn't I?
Yeah, sure.
And of course, they'd stay on my shelf longer than the single tub. So what's wrong with a developer saying, well, our business is land. I can't build anything without land. So what's wrong with buying land when I get the opportunity, popping it in the cupboard and keeping it for a rainy day?
You know what they say about land?
Go on.
They're not making any more of it.
Well, that's true enough, isn't it?
And at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. It's crazy, and I think it's crazy for this government, and I think they'll try and do it, is force them to, if they obtain planning permission, force them to build it within 3 years, which is normally the aim anyway. I appreciate that. But then they will lose that permission after 3 years. Now, at the moment, after 3 years, you can reapply very easily to keep it. I think they'll put some sort of tax on that, or they'll try and force them to build within the 3 years of owning land. I can't see that working out for them very well.
No.
These big, the stats on appeals are very interesting. So if you don't get planning, you go to appeal, which is the government. And if you're a major house builder, you win something like 60% of your appeals. If you're a small developer, like us, if you like, and people like us, you win 38%. Now, why is that? Because they've got the power, they've got the organisation behind them, they've got the top planning barristers and everything else, and that says it all.
Yes, I mean, these appeals can be absolutely
fortunes.
Yes.
Fortunes.
I mean, I'll have to tell you a story. I think we've spoken before. I can remember years and years ago applying for planning permission, which got turned down, and I went to my friend who was well, not a KC, but a QC at the time, and sort of said, well, can we appeal this? And he sort of rubbed his hands together as these people do, and he said, well, you can do it if you can afford it.
Yeah.
He said, but I've got a better idea. He said, why don't you just examine why the planners have turned down what you've presented to them? And I said, So he said, well, they've turned you down because they don't like what your architect has drawn.
Nothing new there.
So why don't you go? Why don't you go back and tell your architect to draw something that they do like?
Yeah, spot on.
You'll find it a lot cheaper. And I'm sure if a lot more people took that sort of view these days, these planning appeals wouldn't run into millions of pounds.
I think on the small ones, you've got a very good point there. And some of these architects, all they're looking to do is win awards. And I always say to the architects we employ, I say this: as soon as they meet me, they start banging on about all the awards they've won. They show me, oh, well, look at this award, that award. And I say, look, that's great. You won't win any awards with us, but you'll get paid on time. What do you want? They said, we'll take the second option, please. Yeah. So, and you do what we ask you to do, because they're constantly want it to, they're overstating whatever themselves and overstating the project, and they're making it more expensive than it needs to be with their materials they use and everything else. So it is a battle with these architects. I mean, but to be fair, they're trained to make everything look lovely and make it work and so on. I understand that.
Okay, well, just on that point of architects and making things look lovely.
My favourite people, yeah. You can tell that.
Two questions here. One, do you think this insatiable appetite for housing numbers, i.e. 1.5 million, is it going to reduce the standard and the quality of buildings in this country? Are we going to just be in a race to the bottom here?
Well, you could argue we're in a race to the bottom on a lot of things at the moment. What I would say is this 1.5 figure, of course, is all about social housing. They don't care whether people their luxury homes are built for people who have got plenty of money. They're a socialist government, or they're meant to be socialist. So they don't care about that. What they care about is banging as many homes up for social housing. Now, some of that is going to be, good quality housing. And a lot of people, key workers, for instance, where nurses, firemen and women, policemen and women who can't afford to otherwise buy in parts of London, perhaps where they need to be, then I think this key workers where they get a discount on the houses and all is a very, very good idea. There's some very good ideas around shared ownership is a very good idea, but it's dealt very badly. So with shared ownership, what they do, you buy half the house on a mortgage and then you pay rent on the other half. Well, if you could pay rent on the other half, surely to God, you could buy the whole damn thing anyway. So that shared ownership needs to be really looked at, because in principle, it's a great idea, but in practice, it doesn't work very well.
In practice, it's not good. I mean,
it doesn't work well. And that's a shame, because a lot of people would get on the housing ladder in some shape or form if they could, but they're not able to.
You know what? It's relatively easy to get on a housing ladder. What is not always easy is getting off. And getting off with your finances intact. And a lot of that shared ownership stuff, the level of handbacks, repossessions is quite high.
Resales are very difficult, but they're made difficult because of these damn lenders that don't understand the product, and the product is probably too complicated for them to read. But so all that sort of thing needs to be dealt with. It could be dealt with very easily. But you and I could do it in an afternoon.
You've got to find somebody who wants to buy half a home, haven't you?
Well, exactly.
If you want to sell it.
But it's bonkers. But if you're a housing association, you're building these properties and selling half of it, why do you need to charge for the other half? It's bonkers.
Well, look, John, as I say, we're looking at this spring statement, and again, coming back to this number of houses that the government is desperate to build.
Yes.
Whether it be local authorities, private buyers, housing associations, buy-to-let investors, all of these people are going to have the funding to be able to buy all these 1.5 million homes.
Build them.
I mean, it's a bit like when people say to me about the property market. I say, well, what do you mean? Which bit?
Yeah, it's massive.
It's massive. It's so complex. It's untrue. So are all these people going to be able to find the funding to be able to buy all this stock? And I know you've just touched on it. A lot of them will be social homes or homes for housing associations, this sort of thing. But they've still got to have the money to purchase them from the builder.
Well, a few things you've hit on there. The first thing is most of these housing associations are very slow at what they do. They're not very dynamic. They're very slow. They're steady eddies. And there's nothing wrong with that, but they're not dynamic. They're never going to get cracking and build enough houses. They haven't got enough funding to do so either, because the government up till recently, certainly haven't released enough money. Most of the funding comes through Homes England. Now, Homes England was set up by the Conservatives. It's a massive property bank to support private developers who find challenging developments, and we've borrowed 20 or 25 million off them in the past, paid it back, so you're okay because it's taxpayers' money. So you're okay, Stephen, you had your money back. We're about to borrow another 20 odd million off them. And they lend to housing associations, and they also lend to councils. Now, the councils have recently, a lot of them have had grants off central government to go and buy brand new houses off developers. Now, that's a bit of a problem, because if you've got a detached house and you're very proud of your new detached house and you bought it and all the rest of it, and suddenly most of the rest of the estate has been purchased by the council, I would argue that becomes more of a council estate. So for anyone viewing who is looking at the moment, buying a new home on an estate, I would check who is buying the other houses.
Right. Well, that's a very touchy subject, isn't it?
It might be, but it's a very important one.
I don't see the Labour government being terribly sympathetic to that argument.
No, but I think it's a very valid one, because you don't want the value of your house going down.
Mm. Well, it's the same in London. Some years ago, we had a mayor here who wanted to put social housing on the same floor of high-rise blocks as private homes.
It doesn't work.
It really just doesn't work, does it? You know,
it doesn't work, and it's been proved not to work. And they're far better off to take what's called a commuted payment off the developer, and then the council uses that cash to go and build
something.
Housing elsewhere. Always better.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. But just to finish off that particular subject, do you think funding is going to be readily available to purchase all this increased level of housing?
I don't think it will be, unless they can do some sort of deal with these insurance companies where they borrow the money for 50 years on a bond, because these councils can afford over a 50-year period.
Sure.
It could be very safe lending. And what you've got to remember is these councils have got these acres and acres of land that could be built on, but they haven't got the funding or the organisation to build on them.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It takes it takes organisation, it takes money, it takes planning, but you wouldn't have thought that'd be too much of a problem. But also it takes tradesmen. Where are all those tradesmen coming? They reckon we need 30,000 more bricklayers alone if you're going to do that. The modular section, so a few years ago, modular was the big thing, and the, prefab, if you like, in old terms, was going to be the thing. But half the modular factories closed down last year in the UK because they couldn't get enough traction in the marketplace. So the idea of modular is it's going to be quick. You could put it up very quickly, but that really hasn't yet, but it's more expensive.
But, a councillor friend of mine brought up a very good subject, and he sort of said, I'll be delighted to see all these homes being built. But he said, what we don't want to do is go back to sort of post-war when a lot of substandard prefabricated housing was built to get over the damage of the war, obviously. And it stayed, didn't it? Yeah. That's the trouble.
Well, it's still being used today, a lot of it, to be fair.
Yeah.
What I would say is the best year for house building was 1967, when we built, you remember 1967, Stephen?
I might.
Dance halls, they were called when you were there, weren't they? Not discos. I remember the discos, possibly. You were the dance halls. Now now there's something else.
Yeah.
They built 367,000 homes that year. And that's a record.
Yeah.
That is the record.
Was that 1967. A Conservative government or a Labour?
Do you know what? It was just after the World Cup, wasn't it? I think it was a Conservative government. I might be wrong.
Well, that's very interesting. And I just think that when we talk about these things, we talk about building all these homes, can there be funding? Can the planning cope with it? Can we get the freedom of release of land to do it all? Do you think the government are really the right people to be strategically thinking this through from beginning to end? I always worry about that.
The one thing they might do, or say they're going to do, is buy land off farmers at a fair price, but not with any hope value. Now, hope value is what you get if you think you're going to get planning. People pay more because they know they're going to get planning. They're doing away with the hope value. The last time they did that successfully was Milton Keynes in the 1970s.
Right.
And they built Milton Keynes on land that was purchased at agricultural value. And that's how they managed to get Milton Keynes built. So if they go back to that...
They got it built, but it was so many years before it actually became proper and viable.
I totally agree. But that's the last time any government has managed to do it. And that was a Labour government. And they managed to do it. And that was the last time. And that's what they're talking about. To get anywhere near the level of new homes built, they've got to take massive chunks of the countryside, probably, and say, we're going to build 40,000 there, we're going to build 20,000 there. And the time it takes to build 20,000 houses or 40,000 houses with the infrastructure, the roads, the schools, the hospitals, the doctors, is huge. I mean, you're talking 5 years in the planning, I'd have thought, before you even start.
Well, there's another factor here, John, as well, is that some of the people that we talk to in the studio who are perhaps into procurement in quite a big way, is are we going to have the materials to do this, or certainly the materials at a reasonable cost? Because we've got wars going on in Ukraine.
Totally agree, Stephen.
In the Middle East, in Africa, in all sorts of places. Devastation like we've just seen in Miramar with the earthquake. All this is going to need to be rebuilt.
Absolutely.
And you'll see our big contractors out there looking for big contracts, huge amount of procurement. Are we going to have the materials left to really construct what we want to do?
Well, you wonder, because 70% of building materials come from Europe and beyond. 70%. So that is a major, major problem.
Yeah. I really don't know how we cater or plan for that. Do you?
I can't see how you can really. All you can do is manufacture more in the UK yourself.
Again, a lot of people say to you, oh well, you know, the solution here is sort of modular building. But there's a difficulty with that, isn't there? There's a difficulty with the funding, because a developer wants, you know, sort of, let's say, modular bathrooms, for instance. So he goes to a manufacturer, they say, yeah, we can build them, but we want paying now.
20% down normally.
Yeah, well, before they leave the site, they want paying in full.
They want paying. And I went,
and the banks won't fund that because they're not on the builder's site, so therefore not capable of being secured.
No, well, I went to a government meeting with the then housing minister. Can't remember which one. We've had 13 or whatever. We've had 11 years. I think
we're on 15 now.
We're on 15 now. And they were coming up with a scheme with Homes England, the government bank, in order to fund the gap between them leaving the factory and arriving on site. But I don't know whatever happened to that. You know, so it is a major problem.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, John Howard, I'm going to say a big thank you to you for coming in today and discussing this.
It's a pleasure as always.
I'm going to ask you back again to the studio, finishing off what we sort of started today, which is looking at the effects of the spring statement on the property market. Thank you for watching. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Matters.